Hi, and welcome to the X22 Report. My name is Dave, and this is episode 286, and today's date is February 10th, 2014, and the title of this episode is, Will American Citizens Be Targets of Drone Attacks? And what are we seeing right now? We are seeing that China has been buying gold, and it has leapt up to 41% to 1,176 tons in 2013. Gold bullion demand surged 57%, and gold jewelry demand surged 43%. The demand surge has helped China become the world's largest gold buyer. They have now bypassed India in the amount of gold that they have acquired. And why are they doing this? Well, they are looking to become the next reserve currency of the world. They've made a clearinghouse in Kenya to clear the yuan, and there are two countries in Kenya that have already started to switch out the reserves. They are dropping the US dollar and adding on yuans. We understand that China has made bilateral trade agreements with countries all around the world: Russia, North Korea, Australia, England, India, and many, many others. They have completely been making deals with all of these nations because they understand to push this forward, this is what they need to do. They also have made the announcement that it's not really beneficial to them to hold US dollars or to acquire more treasury bonds. They've also put into place the petro yuan. So we can see what is happening right now, and they are definitely making their move. They're trying to push this forward, and this is the biggest threat to the United States and to the central bankers, because they are not going to say, oh, okay, they will be the reserve currency, and the United States Central Bank will no longer be the reserve currency of the world. And this is why you see what is going on around the world. This is why you see Bosnia. There is a problem there. This is why you see the problem in the Ukraine. This is why you see the problem in the Middle East and in Africa, because China and the central bankers are all making a play into these countries to establish their presence in this area to push the agenda forward. And in the Middle East, I'll explain this one more time here, and if you don't understand what I'm saying, you can go back in my reports. But in the Middle East, most of the people who are fighting to push the central bankers, the U.S. government, out of their countries, the United States are calling them Al-Qaeda. So they're fighting against the central bankers, and they want them out of there. They want to take over their country. They want to sell their natural resources with any type of currency they want. They don't want to be controlled, and this is why you're seeing this happen right now in the Middle East. The same thing's happening in Africa. And you have to remember also that China has been pumping in billions of U.S. dollars into the infrastructure of these countries. They're in Libya, they're in Lebanon, they've been helping them build their infrastructure, and this is why you see this fighting going on right now. And in the Middle East, we have to understand that the rebels have taken over some of the ports and some of the natural resource oil fields, and they've made the announcement that if any tanker comes in, they will bomb that tanker, because again, if they're selling the oil, not using the US dollar as the reserve currency, the central bankers lose out. The same thing's happening in Africa. We have Chinese on the one side pumping in billions of US dollars, because this is how they're unloading the US dollar. They are pumping it into the economies there, using it to build the infrastructure up for these countries. And we have on the other side, like in the Sudan, the United States has the puppet regime government in there, and China has the rebels, and they're fighting right now. And this is why we see that happening in Sudan. Ukraine, on the other hand, they are not part of the private West central banking system. They're not part of NATO. And as soon as they decided not to go with the EU, this is why you see the riots and everything going on there, because the central bankers, U.S. government, want to remove the government that's in position right now and replace them with a puppet regime. The same thing's happening in Bosnia, and we have the Bosnian government right now. They were thinking about joining the EU, and now they haven't really gone forward with that. And right now the central bankers are getting desperate, and they're trying to push the agenda forward in Bosnia, because they need these countries to be joined up with NATO. They need them on the private Western Central Bank system to continually push debt out there, and this is why they've been trying to get into Iran and Syria, and this is their entire game plan. Okay, let's get back to the economic collapse news here. Barnes and Noble is having a huge problem right now with their Nook. They have just laid off all the engineers that have to do with the Nook hardware. So all those people are out of work right now. And the sales aren't going well. The Nook is not doing well. And they might eventually just completely get rid of the Nook and just focus on digital applications. And we'll have to see how that turns out. But all those people now do not have work at this time. Now we understand that the job numbers are completely manipulated. They changed the calculation back in 1994, and they continually manipulate them and recalculate them, just like GDP and inflation. I've said this many, many times. But in January, of course, they missed their expectations, but the unemployment rate came down to 6.6%. We still have those people who've fallen off the extended unemployment, and they haven't done anything with those people yet. But just in January, there were 2.9 million jobs lost. And again, this does make sense because the amount of jobs, and of course we don't go through every single company, we only take the largest job layoffs and I report those, but you can just see by all those jobs that I've reported, there are a lot of people out of work, and the real unemployment is anywhere between 30 and 37% depending on the calculation that you use. And the underemployment is growing exponentially, and people just can't make ends meet. And this is why you see retail sales going down. This is why you see the housing declining. This is why the mortgage companies laid off thousands of people because and this was back in September, August, October time frame in 2013. They started laying off people when President Obama was out there telling everyone that the housing market is getting better. And of course, they're still out there telling you that the housing market's getting better. But they already know that this is a dead end bubble, and what's going to happen is everything is going to come crashing down. This is why they got rid of the people, because if housing is truly expanding, you would increase the employment in your mortgage department to handle more mortgages. But as we've learned, the mortgages are declining by 66%. Cash purchases by investment companies and hedge funds are around 50 to 60%. And what they're doing is they're buying these homes, they're holding them. Some of them they're trying to rent out. They're trying to drive the prices up. This is all controlled by the Fed. The Fed is giving them the money. And now they're trying to unload these homes. And guess what? There are no Americans to purchase them. Of course there aren't, because unemployment is high, people do not have the disposable income, and we have to think back to 2008 because of all of what happened then with the foreclosures, with the short sales. People don't have the credit. And again, the Fed is still purchasing all these toxic real estate loans from the banks, and they're all just taking them from the banks and moving them to their balance sheet. And this is why the Fed's balance sheet is around $4 trillion and still growing. Now we understand as time goes forward, all the banks, they're insolvent, they don't have cash on them, and eventually when the system comes tumbling down, what is going to happen is they are going to do bail-ins. And we understand that they've created these bail-in documents. They have the FDIC Bank of England document. They have the Eurozone bail-in document. Canada has it. Australia has it. Switzerland has it. And the first document was created in December of 2012. That was the FDIC Bank of England. And then they tried to test it out with Cyprus. And to them, that worked out really well. Because right now, governments are stopping these banks from bailouts. And what they're going to do is they're going to look inside the banks and take the money right from your savings checking account and your retirement fund. And again, this has all been planned because they know what's coming. They've been setting this up and getting prepared because they realize at the end of the day, they will need to use everything that they have done. The bail-ins, DHS, preparing for an economic collapse, preparing for war. This is not by accident. This is not a coincidence. This has been planned all along. And what they're doing is to keep the system propped up, of course, for a little bit longer. They've been looking at retirement, stealing from Social Security, and every country's been doing this. The president came out with MyRA, again, trying to take your money and give you worthless treasury bonds, which you'll never be able to turn in and get anything from, because when the system collapses, they'll be worth absolutely nothing. And this is what they've been trying to do. Now, out in the UK, what they're doing right now is there is a bill being debated in Brussels which would force the UK citizens to disclose reams of private financial information on the public register. A European law is being drafted whose original aim was to prevent corporate money laundering, which we know that's not what it's really for. The objective, supported by the UK, was to force companies to disclose on a register the money and other assets held inside trusts or equivalent legal arrangements. The effect could be to force millions of families to compile elaborate accounts of their assets and financial arrangements, including insurance policies, property, bequests, and made in their wills, for entry into a register. And that register, if legislators get their way, could be made available to any member of the public. They want to see what is inside these trusts, how much money is in there, because guess what they want? They want that money, and this is why they are doing it. They are looking for money any place they can because they realize they need it. This is why the U.S. government and other governments have been creating all of these laws to find tax money any place they can. If they run out of places to look, they're going to tax those people at a higher rate. They're going to impose more taxes on them, and the reason for this is because the system is falling apart, and this is their last-ditch effort to build up as much revenue as they possibly can to keep the system propped up for a little bit longer. But again, all this debt is not sustainable. It can't be. The amount of revenue being brought in is not enough to pay for the debt. And this is why I'm talking about the U.S. government right now and other nations that have received bailouts, but the U.S. government can print money. If the revenue was enough, they wouldn't have to borrow and issue all of these treasury bonds. The Fed prints it up. They issue the treasury bonds to the Fed. The Fed goes out and sells them, but there's no one to buy them, so the Fed purchases the treasury bonds. We are in very big trouble. Now, we understand that the Obamacare health insurance, the Affordable Care Act, is a complete disaster. And right now there was a report, and I reported on this, that Belarus coders helped create the Obamacare website, and now government officials are very worried that there's malware, that they have the potential of stealing your information, and right now, 2 senior aides are being urged to suspend all use of the Obamacare computer network until recent U.S. intelligence warnings of potential cyber attack from Belarus are resolved, and they want the website taken down. And again, was this a plan to take down the website and say, okay, there's been malware because the whole thing doesn't function anyway, and it's a way for them to get out of it? And it does seem like this is what they're trying to do. Now, I wanted to talk about drone attacks. Right now, an American citizen who is a member of Al-Qaeda, allegedly, we don't know for sure, is actively planning attacks against Americans overseas, U.S. officials say. And of course, these U.S. officials will not come forth. They don't want to reveal their names. And the Obama administration is wrestling with whether to kill him with a drone strike and how to do so legally under its new stricter targeting policy issued last year. Well, I'm sorry, if this person's an American citizen, they need to bring him to trial because he hasn't done anything yet. They believe that he might do something. They believe that he belongs to Al-Qaeda. They believe that he could be a terrorist. But again, just believing doesn't mean anything. But again, with the NDAA, guess what? If the president deems you a terrorist, guess what? They can pretty much do whatever they want. And this is starting, and we're starting to see this. But this goes on to say that the CIA drones watching him cannot strike because he's a U.S. citizen, and the Justice Department must build a case against him, and they haven't done that yet. So they're going to build this falsified case and say, okay, go ahead and strike him. But my question is, if the CIA drones are watching him, why don't they pick him up and bring him to trial and let him go through the entire system by getting a lawyer and proving his case and having these charges brought to him and letting a jury of his peers decide if he is some type of terrorist or not? Instead, they're just looking to take him down. And this goes on to say that President Barack Obama's new policy says Americans suspected terrorists overseas can only be killed by the military, not the CIA. And right now the CIA has the drones on him. Two of the officials described the man as Al-Qaeda facilitator who has been directly responsible for deadly attacks against U.S. citizens overseas and who continues to plan attacks against them that would use improvised explosive devices. Now again, this is all hearsay. This is all that someone's saying. There's absolutely no proof right now, and that's why the Department of Justice hasn't come up with anything. And again, they just want to kill an American citizen. Just think about that. If drones were flying around New York and they're saying, okay, we got to beat on we got to lead on this person, they live in this apartment, they just start firing missiles into that apartment to kill that American right there without any type of due process. This is what we're going to see in the future. They're testing it out right now to see how they can get around this entire system so they can just go in and hit Americans with the drones. This is what everyone was talking about worrying about if the drones could be armed. And of course, we know they can be. And this entire system is what everyone has been talking about these drones flying around inside the United States, taking out Americans if they are deemed to be terrorists, without any proof, without any real information, just on the word of the government. Now, of course, the Associated Press has agreed to the government's request to withhold the name of the country where the suspect terrorist is believed to be, because officials said publishing it could interrupt ongoing counter-terror operations. But again, I bring up the point, if they know where this person is and they have an eye on them, why don't they bring him into custody if they have actual information that he has committed terrorist acts, or they have information, or they found anything, and bring him in and question the person? Again, instead, they just want to kill him because, again, this person who they're targeting is really not an Al-Qaeda terrorist. It is someone who is someone is probably that they need to get, and they're trying to make their case. Just like in Yemen, in Pakistan, this is why they've been just firing at people, because these are the people that they are threatened by, and they need to get rid of them. Now, how does the government decide who they should kill with drones? And this is their method that they use to decide who should die and who shouldn't die. The U.S. is relying upon NSA metadata to identify targets for drone strikes. A former NSA operative said the tactic is flawed and the agency targets phones in the hope that the person on the other end of the missile is the bad guy. The most common tactic employed by the NSA is known as geolocation, which entails locking on to the SIM card or handset of a suspected terrorist. The NSA uses a program called GeoCell to follow potential targets and often do not verify whether the carrier of the phone is the intended target of the strike. It's really like we're targeting a cell phone. We're not going after the people, we're going after their phones in hopes that the person on the other end of that missile is the bad guy. So, for instance, if you're at a party and you're with your friends and you decide to pick up someone else's phone and you go off and you said, I'll return it to them later, and that person is deemed to be a terrorist and you have their phone, guess what? You're going to get hit with a missile. So this is their expertise and this is their intelligence findings that they use to determine if someone should live or die. Think about that for a second. Just think about what they are actually doing and the methods that they're using to determine if someone is actually a terrorist and to go after them and kill them. It is absolutely ridiculous. Okay. Now, they are developing new drones to make them better, faster, and make them have the ability to strike people with more ease. And to understand to the extent to which the federal government has the ability to spy on us, we must attempt to understand the technologies it has at its disposal. Argus, it is a surveillance platform with the capability to maintain continuous 24/7 surveillance, day or night, able to track multiple moving targets miles apart in high definition without refocusing the camera. And with a resolution so outstanding, it can detect objects as small as a cellular phone from several miles in the sky. It quite literally provides surveillance over a whole city from one drone. This is the next generation of surveillance. Argus stands for Autonomous Real-Time Ground Ubiquitous Surveillance. And what it can do, it can spot people, it can see your hands, it can distinguish what type of clothing you're wearing, it can actually see your face. This is going to help them strike the targets when they need to strike, or to follow these targets when they need to follow them. And believe me, this technology will be used in the U.S. and in many other places of the world to keep an eye on what is actually going on, because they are so worried about people rising up that they need all this type of technology. And this is what they're going to end up using it for. Okay, now out in the Middle East and in Africa, we understand that the central bankers need to push China, the rebels, Al-Qaeda, out of the country. And they need to lock it down to keep the private Western Central Bank safe, and to keep the natural resources on the U.S. dollar. And then for those countries where they're not on the U.S. dollar, they need to keep the rebels rioting and protesting and pushing the government out. So it's the opposite way. But in South Sudan, we understand that there are peace talks going on. And again, I've said this many, many times. They do not want peace. They will continue to push and push and push, and they will not stop with the war in these countries. And again, in South Sudan, the second round of peace talks in South Sudan, scheduled to start later Monday, has been postponed. So the fighting and everything that's going on there will continue. Now, U.S. is increasing military operations in Somalia, and we understand this is where everything took place, in the mall, in the Kenya's shopping area. And again, at the same time this was happening, China was making a deal with Kenya to become the clearinghouse for the yuan. And this goes on to say that the United States has stepped up its military operations in Somalia in recent months after al-Shabaab fighters attacked an uptown shopping mall in Kenya, capital city Nairobi. And Washington has significantly increased its drone operations there since October 2013. Experts say, however, that the U.S. drone attacks violate the sovereignty of other countries and mostly lead to civilian casualties. And of course, we have to understand, in another country there was a terrorist attack in a mall. And all of a sudden, the United States is in this country, now bringing drones in and firing upon and finding these terrorists. Do we see this happen here in the U.S. if there's some type of terrorist attack, or in the U.K.? Do nations bring their drones into the UK, into Spain, into America, into Canada, and start firing on people that they believe to be terrorists? No, they don't. The central bankers are there to keep everything and to make sure the U.S. dollar and the private Western Central Bank is intact. This is why they are there. It's not because of a terrorist attack in a mall. That has nothing to do with the United States. They are there to keep control of the entire country and to make sure the private Western Central Bank and the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency is not removed, because they understand that China is there making deals with all the African nations, and Kenya now is the clearinghouse for the yuan. So we can see what is happening. And this is happening in the Middle East, in Africa, Ukraine, Bosnia, Thailand. It's happening in all of these countries. Now, we understand the missile shield, the American missile shield in Europe, and right now, I reported this a couple weeks ago, that destroyers are headed towards Spain, and they're going to stay there, and Russia's very concerned about this. But right now in southern Spain, early this week, they welcomed the first of the 4 NATO anti-missile destroyers to be stationed there over the next 2 years. And the deployment of the anti-missile vessels will double the number of U.S. personnel on the base. And the U.S. population on the naval base now is 6,000 people. The presence of the 4 destroyers is only going to strengthen the region's security. And again, they're bringing this in, and all these military assets are being shifted and moved into place in preparation for World War III. They understand that this will lead to war, because what they're doing is they're building their case with Syria. They're provoking China. They're also provoking Russia, showing that they're susceptible to terrorist attacks, that they do not have the proper security for the people in Sochi, and they're also provoking North Korea. And you can see what is happening. They are building this up and they're making sure that all assets are in place for the upcoming war. Okay, now during the peace talks with Iran, and we understand that they're in peace talks, and this under the illusion that Iran is going to modify their nuclear technology and they're not going to build the bomb, which of course they've never have in the last 30 years, and they've always said, oh, in 3 to 5 months they can have a bomb, in 6 weeks they can have a bomb, they're going to use it on everybody, and over 30 years they haven't done anything. What they are doing right now is they're trying to infiltrate Iran's banks. The IMF is there. They're looking to set interest rates. They're looking to move everything over to the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency. And just in case this deal doesn't work out, they're building the propaganda that Iran is actually doing other things. And of course, the Treasury Department is accusing Iran of assisting al-Qaeda now in sending jihadist fighters to Syria to attack the Assad government. And of course, we know this not to be true, because Assad government has very close ties with Iran. They even have a pact with each other. If Syria is attacked, Iran would come to help them in any type of war situation. So they are building the propaganda, and they are making sure that it's out there in the public so everyone understands. They heard this propaganda. Now, we understand that Assad has to remove the chemical weapons, and the West is out there, the United States central bankers is out there, and they're still saying that they're really getting fed up with Assad taking so long to remove the chemical weapons. This goes on to say Western governments led by the United States took Syria to task for failing to surrender its chemical weapons under ambitious deadlines agreed with Russia after a poison gas attack in August. A senior Western diplomat said the Syrian government is teasing us by dragging its heels while doing enough to avoid being declared in a non-compliance with its obligation to destroy its chemical weapons program. And again, the rebels in Syria are making it very difficult, and this has been reported on by the UN, to remove the chemical weapons. And again, they're doing what they can at this time. The UN is there, Russia is there, but the U.S. government, the central bankers, the West, are building up the propaganda because they need this, because they are going to use this to strike Syria. And this is why they've been building up. The Syrian Electronic Army is cyber attacking all of these websites, Microsoft, CNN, eBay, PayPal. They are building the propaganda up for cyber attacks. They've also been building the propaganda that Assad has hidden chemical weapons and developed biological weapons, and They're hidden in the Alawite section of Syria, and they could be used here in America. And we can see what is happening now. They're building up the propaganda that Syria is creating terrorists. Americans, of course, are being radicalized there, and they're going to end up coming home, which the FBI has already reported that Americans have been returning home, and they've been trying to watch all of them, trying to look for them, because these people could end up doing something here in the U.S. And they're just building this up for the next false flag event, and this is exactly what is going on right now. Now, Saudi Arabia has joined the bandwagon because they've probably been instructed to do this, has called for an emergency meeting over what is happening in Syria, because they're saying that these war crimes need to be answered by Assad. He has been committing many, many war crimes, and all this propaganda came up during the Geneva II talks, which we know they're most likely not going to go anywhere. They're not going to, end up doing anything, and they'll probably blame the whole thing on Assad. In the end, saying that they couldn't come to an agreement and we need to take it to the next level. And this is what they really want, because the Geneva II talks was really about removing Assad and putting in a transitional government, just like the U.S. wants to put a transitional government in the Ukraine, is trying to push Bosnia government into joining the EU, and if they won't, they'll just remove them. In Thailand, it's the opposite. The puppet regime's already there. The protesters want a fair, real democratic election. The government won't let this happen, because then they'll lose the puppet regime, which is controlled by the central bankers in the U.S. government. So we can see what is actually happening here and how all this is going to play out. Now, we understand that the governments like to control the internet, and they want complete control. Turkey has created the bill, and of course Erdogan has come out and said, "Oh, no, don't worry about it. It doesn't mean we're going to be censoring anything or letting people visit different websites." But of course, it's always the opposite. What he's really saying is, yes, we're going to censor everything, and you will not be permitted to do anything, and we can shut down the internet anytime we want. In the UK right now, what they're trying to do is ban certain videos. They want to ban extremist videos which help to radicalize impressionable young men, and they want these videos blocked in the UK. They've already controlled, the porn sites that they visit, and now they want to control what information coming out of these countries the people in the UK can see. And again, what they're really doing is they do not want them to see what the paid mercenaries are doing in these countries, because the UK is involved, the US government's involved, Saudi Arabia is involved, Israel's involved, France is involved, and they have these paid mercenaries, which are the rebels fighting against Assad, and they do not want the people of the country seeing what they're actually doing. They want to keep this from them, and they don't want these videos coming out. They want the ability to block them. And of course, this is what they're really trying to do. They're trying to control what we see, so they can tell their story, because they do not have control of the internet, and this is a huge worry. They have control of the corporate media, which they completely control because the government kind of owns them, and they tell them what to say. The internet and the new media or the alternative media, they do not have control over. So they want to start blocking what people see, because they want their story told in their way. They don't want other people looking into anything. They just want what they say out there, and that is it, and you will believe it. That's what they're looking to do. Now, there is a technology firm called Prolexic, and they have done a report, and they're saying that it has been revealed that many malicious attacks appear to be intent on temporarily preventing trades from taking place in the financial institutions. Prolexic Technologies has shared analysis of nearly a dozen global DDoS denial of service attacks, that's what that means, that indicate cyber attacks are using these DDoS attacks in an attempt to influence market values and interfere with exchange platforms. We've seen this before in the NASDAQ, the stock exchange, and in the Chicago Mercantile. Every time something happens, all of a sudden there's a glitch, and all of a sudden everything goes back to normal or the way they want it to go back to. And what they're saying is they found a direct relationship between DDoS cyber attacks and a temporary change in the valuation of a company. DDoS attacks keep getting bigger, stronger, longer, and more sophisticated, and eventually they'll be able to manipulate the market any way they want and bring it down. So we can see what is happening here, and we understand that when this false flag event occurs, this will be done with a cyber attack, and of course using biological, chemical, nuclear, whatever else they're going to use at the time. But again, they're going to blame it on another country because they understand that the collapse is coming, and they need to blame this on another country, and this will allow them to say, look, they hit our financial institution, they hit the stock exchange, the NASDAQ, they brought it down, everything's messed up, they hit the banks, people's money's gone, we're going to have to shut everything down, we're going to have to do a bank holiday, and all of a sudden then you'll see, chemical weapons hit in a different city, biological weapon hit in a different city, and power go out in many different places. And this is what they're going to use because they need to create the atmosphere that another country is hitting us, and this is why our economy has completely been destroyed. And this will allow the U.S. government, the central bankers, to strike that country. And right now it looks like it might be Syria, or it could happen in the Ukraine-Russian region. We'll have to see how that turns out. But right now, the biggest thing right now is Syria and in the Middle East area right there. Now, Chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, Representative Michael McCaul, warned that he believes there is a high degree of probability there will be some kind of terrorist attack during the Olympics outside of Sochi's Ring of Steel. I think there's a high degree probability that something is going to, let's say something will detonate, something will go off, but I do think it's probably most likely to happen outside of the Ring of Steel at the Olympic Village. He said, I hope I'm wrong in this assessment, but you're talking about an area of the world where suicide bombers go off all the time, and the fact is right now the eyes of the world are upon these Olympics. Now, we need to put this in perspective. Before the Olympics started, they had bombings, and again, these were terrorist attacks, and I just can imagine who actually decided to push that forward right before the Olympics. And it's probably the CIA, U.S. government, central bankers who actually did that to build up the propaganda that this area is always being hit by terrorist attacks. And ever since then, to every single traveler going to Sochi, there's been, travel advisory for those people traveling to Sochi, terrorist warnings. They're worried about the outskirts of Sochi getting hit with the terrorist attack. And now they're coming out telling us, yes, there is going to be some type of an explosion or something. The reason why they pretty much say this is because they've been planning it, and they know this for a fact that this is what's going to happen. Now, will it happen or won't it happen? If they get the green light to go, yes, it will. If they don't, it will not happen. But they already know this has already been planned. Just like Janet Napolitano was out there saying not if, but when there is a cyber attack on the financial and power infrastructure, that is when. This, he's saying, is a high probability because he knows that something is in the works and ready to do this. This is why the FBI is there. This is why they put up all this terrorist alerts and stuff, because they want people to know they are on top of this. They see what's going on, and look, we called it. There was a terrorist strike in the country, and look, Russia couldn't protect the people in Sochi, and their security is not good. And this is what they're building up to, and this is what they're trying to show everyone around the world. Okay, now, there are documents that the Ohio National Guard training drill conducted last January reveals that details of a mock disaster where Second Amendment supporters with an anti-government opinions were portrayed as domestic terrorists. Now, really, people who support the Constitution, the Second Amendment, were deemed as domestic terrorists. Again, we knew long ago that this is what they were going to try to do, and right now they are training for this. The National Guard, the 52nd Civil Support Team training scenario involved a plot from local school district employees to use biological weapons in order to advance their beliefs about protecting gun rights and Second Amendment rights. So, I mean, we can see what is going on here. Chad Bouse told media trackers that it is a scary day indeed when law enforcement are being trained that Second Amendment advocates are the enemy. The U.S. Department of Homeland Security warned law enforcement agencies that a predicted rise in right-wing extremists would be fueled by proposed imposition of firearm restrictions and weapon bans. Throughout the modern history, groups and individuals associated with left-wing causes have proven far more likely to commit acts of domestic terror than any other group. So you can see what is happening right now. And I'm going to just repeat this, and I've said this many times. And for those new people, those people who are new, you probably have never heard me say this, but during the Boston bombing, at the same exact time, they were trying to pass the gun bills in the Senate. The bomb was made out of gunpowder. And what happened there, I believe they were trying to make it seem like Second Amendment extremists actually blew the bomb there. And what happened was everyone started taking photos and started to prove who actually did this. And this is why they shut down the cell towers so no one can transfer the photos. And what they didn't realize at the time was that these photos were stored on the cell phone. And when the cell towers came back up, everyone was able to transmit them. At the same time this happened, there was just all of a sudden an explosion down in Texas at a fertilizer plant. That took all eyes off of the Boston bombing area and all eyes on Texas. And for one day, all the news was about Texas until they could regroup and come up with a new story of who the terrorists were in Boston. And then all of a sudden, they said, we need to see as many photos on your cell phones. Please turn them into the FBI. And everyone pretty much did because they wanted to see what was out there. And what they did was they completely changed the story, and then they did, the martial law, the lockdown, the hunt for these two people who didn't have weapons, and all of this. And the whole thing was a complete setup because everyone has shown that these two had really absolutely nothing to do with it. And they are been doing this and training because they understand when they try to disarm the American people, people are not going to take this very well. And when martial law and everything is locked down, those people who still have firearms, who still are constitutionalists and believe in the Second Amendment, these are the people they're going to go after. They're going to try to take about 80% of the people's weapons, and it's the 20% that they're worried about. And this is why they have been training like this. They've been doing this because they understand when the lockdown comes and martial law has been declared, they need to gather these people up before things get out of hand, and this is what the training has been about. Listen, everyone, thanks a lot for listening. Be well, be safe, and especially be prepared. Thanks a lot.